you were there for both the Pope's apology in Rome and here in Canada. I just wanted to ask, like, what did you make of the apologies, having covered it for so long?
Well, I mean, certainly we've talked to so many survivors that are still very deep in their trauma and dealing with much of the pain and hurt left over from those residential school experiences. So it was a mixed bag. I mean, we ran into people that just said, you know, those words don't mean anything unless there's action behind it. But for others, it was very incredible to hear them say that, you know, once they did hear the apology, that it was almost like that pain and that hurt literally left their body, and that, you know, they were able to start their healing process and move on. So it was kind of a mix of both reactions along the way.
Now, Tina, I wanted to ask sort of a personal question here. Like, how do you approach a story where you're sharing these survivors' stories? I mean, there's such important stories to share, and you know, a lot of times vulnerable as well.
Absolutely, Daryl. I mean, each time is different, but you know, I love to really get to know a person before I approach the interview. I talk to them about what they're willing to share, how much they're willing to share. You know, I talk about the importance of telling their story to people that don't know about what happened during that terrible time. So I approach it on a specific level depending on the person. I spend a lot of time talking to them before we actually start rolling, and that's how we approach it.
And you know, when you do hear these stories, I mean, it has to have some sort of effect, right? I mean, even when I watch some of the work you do, I mean, it sort of gets me a little bit emotional. I mean, so how do you handle that?
Well, it has been incredibly difficult, I have to admit. I mean, you know, when the 215 were first discovered, I was actually on summer holidays, and I got a phone call from the communications person over there in Kamloops, and they said, there's breaking news, you've got to come cover this. And so I literally just took myself off of holidays and went right back to work. And, you know, we arrived there not knowing what to find, and when we arrived there, it was like shocking. Nobody could really believe that there's actually unmarked graves just not too far from where we were all gathered. Now, it has taken a bit of a toll, I have to admit, but you know, I just keep believing that these stories need to be told. All Canadians need to know the truth about what happened at residential schools, and I have a really good, strong, supportive team behind me at APTN, including my colleague here, Simon Charlon. So we get to break, you know, incredible stories and give people voices that normally would never be heard. So we're very proud of that fact.
And we're very proud that you know, you're here with us as well. So for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, you have a documentary. So your documentary was featured here on APTN. Can you tell us a little bit about your documentary?
Yes, absolutely. We start from the very beginning. We go back to when the 215 were first discovered, and then next we travel to Rome, and we do some amazing summary of what our trip over there. I mean, it was intense, that trip. I mean, we worked long hours. We were 9 hours ahead of you here in Canada, so our deadline over there to file was like midnight every night. So we worked up until midnight every day, you know, filing those stories, and so much was going on. You know, it was just a very emotional time, and especially when he actually apologized. I mean, you could just hear a gasp within the crowd that, you know, this was the long-awaited apology that no other pope has done before. So we start there in Rome, we complete our journey over there in Musqueam, and then we bring it back home here to North Vancouver, where we talk with an elder by the name of Sam George, and I think he'll be playing that clip pretty soon. It was also important for me to wrap up the documentary with hearing from people that we met within that half hour, and then also some national leadership about what next, what should happen next after these apologies. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, and you had just mentioned Sam George, Tina. I think we're going to go to that clip right now, actually. So here's that Sam George clip from your documentary.
It's been a few years since Sam George came to this cemetery located on the Squamish Nation in North Vancouver, BC. He's here to come pay his respects to a little boy that he knew from residential school, named Charlie Lucas.
Probably in your 70s now. Probably would have been about 70 years old.
Sam George is now 78 years old, but in 1952, He, along with other Indigenous kids, were taken to St. Paul's Residential School, located not far from the cemetery. He remembers the first day that he first met little Charlie.
And there was about 4 or 5 of us playing, and I looked up and I seen this little boy standing there, and it was his first day of school. The nun said, "Number 3," or I don't know if she called me by my number, which was not unusual. She said, "This is Charlie, you take care of him." And so, like, I took care of Charlie. He was just like, everybody called him my little puppy. Everywhere I went, he was right behind me.
Sam says that he loved looking after little Charlie, and then one night, everything changed.
Charlie was sleeping a couple of beds away from me, and I was laying there, and I heard him crying, and I got up and looked, and he was sitting there. He was holding his head, and he was crying. And I went over, and I sat beside him. I said, "What's wrong, Charlie?" He said, "My head hurts." They rushed him to St. Paul's Hospital, and they operated on him, and his brain was swelled. Yeah, little Charlie didn't make it. They said he died on the operating table.
It wasn't until years later that Sam found out what really happened to little Charlie Lucas.
My cousin said, "Remember that little guy who followed you around?" I said, "Yeah, Charlie." He said, "Well, we were upstairs in the daytime. We weren't supposed to be up there. And we heard the nun coming upstairs. So we hid away in the closet. There was just enough for them to squeeze in, but they could see the top of the stairs. The nun got to the top of the stairs, and she had little Charlie with her. And for whatever reason, she got to the top of the stairs, and she started slapping Charlie around, punching him. And he was crying, and she started shaking him, and then she threw him down the stairs. She was shaking him so much, he went flying all the way down to the bottom of the stairs. And I really believe she got away with murder, eh? He died because of her.
Tina, I mean, that's just such a powerful story, and I mean, it's hard not to get a little bit emotional watching something like that. So can you maybe just sort of explain that clip that we just watched a little bit, and maybe how that came about and that type of thing?
Absolutely. I've known Sam George for many years, and I knew a little bit of his story, and he always talked about that little boy Charlie, and I said, okay, let's sit down and do the interview. So we've actually had that interview for a while. I knew it was something that was very special when we shot it, but it took me a while to go through it, as you say, because it was so emotional to watch. But really, it was almost like a sense of us being guided when I was, going through the footage and writing the script and writing the voiceovers and figuring out the flow of how the story was going to go. And then when we finally saw the end piece, I mean, I cried. I honestly cried my eyes out, because I feel so bad for that little boy Charlie and all the other little ones that never made it home. There's many little Charlies out there, as we're now finding out. So, once again, I feel that it's very important that Canadians understand the impact of those houses of horror and what happened and what still is continuing to traumatize our communities. I think that it's incredibly important that we do shows like this on InFocus, and thank you so much for using this as one of your topics, and something that we've certainly spent a lot of time and effort in covering over the years. So thank you to everyone there at head office for allowing us to do these types of stories.
Well, and a big thank you to you and everyone who does these stories. And I guess just what sort of gave you the idea to do this documentary? I mean, I think it's such an important piece to do. So, where did that idea sort of come about to share all of these very impactful stories?
Well, I mean, there's no question, the last year for Simon and I has been incredibly busy, traveling to Rome and going to Musqueam. We also went over to Saskatchewan, at the Cowessess First Nation, where the 751 unmarked graves were found there. I mean, the whole experience of it all, I really wanted to try to put that together in a very short window of, this is what we deal with on a daily basis. I mean, every day we go to work, we know that we have a very important job to do, and I really wanted to showcase some of that work and some of those incredible people that we've met along the way. I know that I was deeply affected when we were over there in Cowessus. The first night that we actually arrived there on the reserve, they had put 751 solar lights in the ground. And I was standing out there in the middle of the field as the sun went down and all the lights started to pop up. All 751. I mean, it was like the magnitude of that, to see how many they were, that were lighting up. It was very profound, definitely.
And this reconciliation journey is so far from over, and the healing journey for these survivors is far from over. I mean, every place that you go to, what are you sort of hearing from these survivors in terms of, what needs to happen now? I mean, an apology's happened. Some survivors, don't really acknowledge the apology. But I mean, what are you hearing everywhere you go, having reported on this for so long, about what needs to happen now in these next steps?
I'm still hearing so much pain and sadness and horror as to what happened to themselves or their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents even. I think what needs to happen, and certainly what I've been seeing, is that we need more healing centers for trauma. Trauma is evident everywhere we go, and there's just not enough support and help for these survivors to go and truly confront their demons and confront their past and look forward to, roads of healing. And I think that we need more healing centers. I'm very disheartened that the Catholic Church has not stepped up with that healing fund as of yet, because it needs to happen immediately, and I don't know why that hasn't happened.
Have you heard from survivors just on what you just touched about in terms of that fund at all? Is that something that's been talked about?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Many of them are so upset. They're like, what do you mean? This is like one of the richest organizations in the world. Why is it that they can't come up with this funding? They're ordered to pay that years and years ago, and now I think that they've announced another delay. And in fact, when we were in Italy at a press conference, it was one of the archbishops that said that they would be asking their parishioners for donations to help support that fund, where we know they literally spend hundreds of millions of dollars renovating their churches across Canada every year. So why is that fund why hasn't that fund been established? I mean, the need is great and the time is now. So I really implore the Catholic Church to really step up to their obligation and pay that fund, and let's start the healing process now.
And I just, one more follow-up quickly on that one is, what are survivors maybe doing about that, or the lack thereof of the fund?
I think they're trying what they can, with what they have. I mean, certainly there's healers within our community that will be able to come and do smudging and do some ceremonial work and do some, sweat lodge ceremonial work. But I think that we need to go much deeper, and I think that, this healing should be applied to generations forward as well, because many of these parents that are struggling right now with their trauma, they really didn't know how to be parents. They didn't know how to show their love and affection to their children, and that is certainly affecting the future generations. So this is a huge, huge issue, and the $30 million fund that was ordered for the church to pay is not enough money. We need way more money than that, because this is larger than anybody even knows.
And Tina, we're running a little short on time here. I do want to get one last question in, and you had mentioned it with the youth and how important they are in all of this. Can you sort of, tell us just how important the youth is and what survivors are saying about the youth?
Well, I'll tell you, I spent some time with one of our guests on the show here today, and forgive me, his traditional name, Stuart Gonzalez. I mean, yesterday we spent some time with him in Stanley Park, and he talked about that he actually didn't have family. He didn't have parents. He had a father that was not always there. His mother passed away when he was 7 years old. But when he spoke about his family now and everything that he's been through, he is the father of 3. He's the grandfather of 11 and the great-grandfather of 13. And just to see the joy in his face when he said, you know what, this is all about the future. This is all about my great-grandkids and me passing along a proud legacy of leadership to them. And it just really warmed my heart to see somebody that has been through so much trauma, but yet completely completely vibrant and alive and positive, and such kind eyes and such a beautiful spirit, passing that along to his grandchildren. I think that it's a beautiful circle, full circle actually, for Stuart Gonzalez. So I was very, very happy to see that, and I've seen that in many other survivors that I've met as well.
Well, I think that's a great little way to end our little talk here, Tina. So I want to say again, thank you, Miigwech, for taking some time here.
Thank you so much.